Most modern wars are never officially declared between the real rivals involved. Powerful nations increasingly fight through militias, allied governments, and armed groups instead of direct confrontation. Nuclear weapons changed how global powers compete after World War II. Proxy wars became the safest way for major powers to fight without triggering nuclear escalation. The same system designed to prevent World War III may be creating endless indirect conflict. A proxy war is a conflict where powerful nations back local fighters, governments, or armed groups instead of sending their own troops into battle. The support comes in four main forms: weapons and equipment, training and intelligence, money and information campaigns. These pillars give sponsors flexibility. Sometimes it is a crate of rifles. Other times it is encrypted radios, suitcases of cash, or a flood of social media propaganda. The real advantage is plausible deniability. When a militia receives new drones or a rebel group suddenly has fresh supplies, outside sponsors can deny involvement, dodging blame and avoiding the political fallout of direct intervention. The logic is simple. Supporting a proxy costs less in money and lives than fighting openly. In joint military doctrine, boil it down to a formula: sponsors get strategic influence at a fraction of the cost, with far less risk of public backlash at home. No body bags on the evening news, no need for a declaration of war. Even if the conflict drags on, the sponsor's exposure stays low, and the war can be kept off the front page. Strategists have called this a cost avoidance mechanism. It turns war into something that can be managed, budgeted, and even denied. Every dollar spent on a proxy replaces thousands that would be needed for a full-scale deployment. This structure is now embedded in military thinking, shaping conflicts from the Cold War to the present. The result is a system where the true patrons stay in the shadows, while local actors bear the brunt of the fighting. The next step is to see how this system took root in official policy and became the default playbook for global powers. In April 1950, the United States National Security Council issued NSC 68, a classified directive that redefined American strategy. The text warned that the Soviet Union's growing nuclear arsenal made direct confrontation too dangerous. Instead, the memorandum called for a massive military buildup and a new focus on supporting allies and insurgents abroad. Within months, the Korean War erupted. Washington funneled weapons, military advisors, and cash to South Korea, while Soviet and Chinese support flowed just as quietly to the north. The pattern was set. Indirect war became official policy, not just improvisation. By 1962, the world had come within hours of nuclear catastrophe during the Cuban Missile Crisis. The United States military shifted to DEFCON 2, the highest alert short of war. In the same week, new orders went out, instructing commanders to expand covert aid to anti-communist forces in Southeast Asia. The logic was clear in declassified memos: avoid nuclear escalation by fighting through surrogates, not direct confrontation. Vietnam followed this template. The United States built up the South Vietnamese army with billions in aid, while the Soviets and Chinese armed the North. The battlefield became a proxy for superpower rivalry, with each side calculating how far they could push without triggering a nuclear exchange. When the Soviets invaded Afghanistan in 1979, the United States responded with Operation Cyclone, covertly supplying the Mujahideen with Stinger missiles and cash, forcing Soviet helicopters out of the low skies. In Angola, Cuban troops and Soviet rockets faced off against United States-backed UNITA fighters, each side using local forces to advance global aims. Declassified alert records and internal memos show how nuclear deterrence hardened proxy warfare into doctrine. The cost of direct war was existential. The price of indirect war could be budgeted, managed, and denied. Proxy logic was now embedded in the playbook of every major power, shaping conflicts from Africa to Asia. The next layer of this system would be economic, the hidden incentives that keep proxy wars burning long after the first shots are fired. A war that costs less is a war that lasts longer. Proxy sponsors know this better than anyone. The financial math behind modern proxy conflict is simple. Why spend billions on a full-scale invasion when you can bankroll a local force for a fraction of the price? Arms brokers, logistics officers, and covert financiers move money and materiel through a maze of contracts and false paperwork, turning war into a budget line item. The hidden engine is extractive. In the Central African Republic, UN expert panels uncovered security contracts that grant up to 30% of mineral profits to outside backers. These deals guarantee exclusive rights to gold, diamonds, or timber, with armed protection for every mine. The exact clauses stay buried in confidential annexes, but customs records tell the story. Shipments labeled as agricultural equipment in Djibouti, in reality, concealed drone parts or ammunition bound for conflict zones. Duplicate invoices and manifest ruses keep the true value and destination off the books. This is not just about weapons, it's about revenue streams. The sponsor pays for guns, training, and logistics, but then collects a share of whatever the proxy extracts, minerals, oil, or even timber. In many cases, a third of the profits go straight to the foreign patron, based on leaked agreements and UN investigations. The war, in effect, pays for itself, or even turns a profit. That's why these conflicts do not burn out when local resources are exhausted, or when peace talks begin. As long as the cost for the sponsor stays low, and the revenue keeps flowing, the incentive to keep the war going outweighs any urge to end it. The next layer is operational. How these financial mechanics play out on the ground, shaping the daily reality of proxy fighters and their backers. Syrian cities became a living map of foreign interests almost overnight. By 2022, field researchers counted more than 800 foreign military sites scattered across the country. Iranian-backed militias controlled checkpoints in the south, Russian air defense batteries ringed the coast, and Turkish patrols cut through the north. Each sponsor shipped in its own weapons, Russian S-400 missiles, Iranian jammers, American guided rockets, turning Syria into a test zone for rival arsenals. Local commanders, caught between shifting alliances, sometimes ignored their patrons to protect their own towns. A humanitarian worker in Idlib described the chaos. One day, aid convoys move safely. The next, a new checkpoint appears and the rules change. Civilians are left guessing who is in charge. Libya's airspace told a similar story. Drone wreckage littered the desert after battles between Haftar's forces and United Nations-recognized militias. On one side, Chinese-made Feilong 1 drones, low-cost, modular, flown by contractors tied to the United Arab Emirates. On the other, Turkish Bayraktar TB2s, piloted remotely from Istanbul. Both sides claimed deniability, but satellite data tracked flight paths back to foreign bases. The United Nations embargo on arms imports did little to slow the flow. Instead, Libya became an open-air arms expo, where sponsors trialed new drone models, electronic warfare pods, and loitering munitions with live targets. The fallout spilled far beyond the front lines. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees reported over 13 million Syrians displaced by 2023, the largest refugee crisis since World War II. Aid groups in Libya struggled to keep up as drone strikes and shifting front lines forced civilians to flee again and again. A regional journalist summed up the mood. Every new weapon, every new sponsor means more uncertainty for families trying to survive. Proxy wars, once a tool to avoid superpower confrontation, now create battlegrounds where civilians pay the highest price, caught between sponsors competing for influence and technologies tested with little regard for human cost. Private military companies and proxy militias often begin as tools for their sponsors, but control rarely lasts. Wagner Group's record in Africa and Ukraine shows how quickly the lines blur. Roughly 3,200 Wagner fighters have died on foreign soil, yet the group operates with its own command structure and chases profits from gold and diamond mines, sometimes outside direct Russian orders. In Mali, Wagner contractors secured mineral concessions and set up independent checkpoints, ignoring Kremlin preferences. Hezbollah, originally an Iranian-backed militia, now negotiates its own political deals in Lebanon, and even publicly opposes Tehran's strategies when local interests are at stake. Houthi commanders in Yemen have launched missile strikes and ceasefire talks without Iranian approval, acting on their own survival calculus. United Nations and United States Treasury sanctions can freeze accounts, but autonomy on the ground often outpaces paperwork. Once proxies gain experience, cash flow, and local legitimacy, they become actors in their own right, no longer just extensions of their sponsors' will. Cheap, advanced weapons now flood proxy battlefields. AI-powered loitering munitions, sometimes costing less than $10,000 each, can hunt targets with minimal human oversight. Cyber operations and disinformation campaigns run around the clock, blurring the line between the battlefield and the home front. RAND projections warn that as these technologies spread, the cost to sponsors keeps dropping, while the damage inflicted only increases. Department of Defense budget requests show billions flowing into autonomous strike units and digital warfare toolkits designed for proxy use. The result is a feedback loop. The easier it becomes to wage war by proxy, the harder it is to stop. Each new tool, whether a drone, a botnet, or a fake news wave, makes the system more resilient, more profitable, and less accountable. The question remains, do proxy wars prevent larger wars or create endless instability? Next, how economic sanctions became modern warfare. Behind every proxy conflict are incentives that make peace the least costly choice for outsiders, not for those caught in the crossfire. Do proxy wars prevent larger wars or create endless instability? Drop your perspective below. Next, how economic sanctions became modern warfare.